ways to bring about his king, first David and then Jesus. The second thing is that the story is set in the time of Judges, and that is very significant. You see, in the book of Judges, the land is under judgment. If you remember, if you go back to Deuteronomy 28, God had told the people as they were leaving Egypt that if they obey, they are going to be blessed and they will have many blessings in the land. But if they disobey, what was supposed to be a blessing will turn and become a curse. So what is happening in the book of Judges is that the people are disobeying God. They are rejecting God. They are doing the opposite of what Moses and Joshua told them. So what happens? There is a lot of judgment going on in the book of Judges. God is giving them up to the nations around them. And here we see another way God is judging the people. God judges them through famine, as you see in the book of Ruth. But even amidst that judgment, this story is a story of God's kindness amidst judgment. So when we are looking at the book of Judges, it has two components. There is the sin of the people, which leads to judgment. But then there is the mercies of God that actually he sends judges to redeem the people. And that is exactly what is happening here in the book of Ruth. They are under judgment, but we see God's mercy. We see, God's kindness even amidst judgment. So in a way, the book of Ruth is very, very similar to the book of Judges. Then let me finish with the final reason why this is a story about God and his people. The story of Boaz and Ruth echoes another story in Genesis 38. It's actually quoted there in Ruth chapter 4. It echoes the story of Judah and Tamar, because Bethlehem is actually the city of Judah. And here, this story shows us just how broken the tribes of Israel are because of sin. And yet, on the other hand, we see how God works in this mess to bring about his king. And he uses very unlikely women. He uses Tamar, he uses Rahab, he uses Ruth to bring about salvation to his people. So what we see with Ruth and Boaz is actually very similar to what we would have seen with Judah and Tamar. A lot of brokenness, and yet God works through that to bring about salvation, to bring about redemption for his people. Anyway, I hope I'll be able to convince you even more as we continue looking at the book of Ruth that it is actually about God and it is about his people. But let's start looking at our first chapter. We will look at this through three main headings. So, tutaangalia verse 1 to 5, and here we will see judgment is upon Israel and upon Naomi's family. So, maybe not the way you like a story to start, but yeah, verse 1 to 5, judgment is upon Israel and upon Naomi's family. Then we look at verse 6 to 18, and here we will see, but there is hope amidst judgment. But there is hope amidst judgment. And then verse 19 to 22, we will see there is rescue when Naomi returns to the Lord. Verse 19 to 22, there is rescue when Naomi returns to the Lord. So three things for us this morning. Judgment, ghadhabu ya Mungu iko juu ya Israeli na familia ya Naomi. Verse 6 to 18, but there is hope amidst judgment. Even amidst this darkness and judgment, there is hope. And finally, there is rescue when Naomi returns to the Lord. So the story starts badly, but the story will get better as we move on. So let's start with the first one. Judgment is upon Israel, verse 1 to 5. Now, we will see several crises that this family faces. And here is the first one, famine, in verse 1 and 2. We read, in the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab. he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech. The name of the wife was Naomi. The 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. So what is the first crisis that we see here? We are told there is a famine in the land, and this family has to leave and go to a foreign country. Now, this is supposed to surprise you in a way, because in Hebrew, the name Bethlehem means the house of bread. So in a way, this is an irony that the house of bread, the house of plenty, has become empty. It has become the house of want. That is what happens because of sin. Dhambi imeifanya ile nyumba ya mkate ikakuwa nyumba ambayo haina chakula. There is no more bread in Bethlehem. Even more surprising, God's people have to look for bread outside of Canaan. Now, when you have been doing the Bible overview, what have you been expecting about Canaan? Canaan is the land that flows with milk and honey. But actually, do you know what happens? All that milk, all that honey is gone because of people's sin. So here is the first crisis that the family faces. There is famine in the land, and they have to become refugees in another country. Not only that, in a country that is a pagan country, a country that worships Chemosh, the god of Moab, a country that is actually an enemy of Israel. And just so that you realize the seriousness of it, it is not just for a short trip. They didn't go there for a season. They did not travel there for a summer break. Actually, in verse 2, we are told they remains there. The idea ni wanakaa hapo for a long time. Verse 4 actually tells us they are in Moab for more than 10 years. Now, I want you to imagine this. Sometimes here in the country, we have drought. And when we miss one harvest, we normally need relief food. Now, I want you to imagine this. Missing 10 harvests. You go through a whole presidency, anafanya 1 term, na anafanya 2 term. Yote through famine. I want you to imagine that. 10 years of famine. That is serious, isn't it? I mean, we cannot even survive 1 year. Even 2 years of famine, people will be dying. We will be, moving to other nations. They are going through famine for 10 years. That is a very serious crisis. And I think it's supposed to tell you, this is not normal. This is God's hand of judgment. As if that is not enough, so the family has to leave their land. They have to go to a pagan nation. As if it is not enough, look at verse 3. While they are away in Moab, what happens? But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. In Moab, Naomi becomes a widow. She loses her husband and is left with her 2 sons. You are far away from home, and now you no longer have a husband. And here I was wondering, wouldn't you want to go back if you lost your husband in a foreign nation? Why is it that Naomi doesn't go back? I think it is because there is nothing to go back to. The land is still in famine. They are still better off in Moab. They don't even go back to bury Elimelech. They stay in Moab. Crisis number 2 leads to crisis number 3. Nakwambia hapa zinaendelea. Look at verse 4. Let me start at verse 3. Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. They lived there about 10 years. I don't know whether you spotted a crisis. Perhaps you have not. But there's a very big crisis here. See, part of the problem why the book of Judges is facing judgment, the nation is facing judgment, is because the people are making covenants with other nations. And one way they are doing that is marrying foreign women. And these foreign wives, actually, in Deuteronomy 7, they were warned they would lead them to worship other gods. Actually, this is the problem with King Solomon. King Solomon, in 1 Kings 11, marries a daughter of Moab. And actually, it goes very badly that Solomon builds this daughter an altar in Jerusalem to worship the god of Moab, Chemosh. That is one of the reasons why he is dethroned. So what we see here may not be a big issue, humanly speaking, but actually, as a Hebrew, marrying a lady from Moab is quite a serious issue. Spiritually speaking, they are not only forsaking God's land in Moab, but it would seem they are forsaking God and his words. So number 3, we have a crisis, a spiritual crisis. They have turned away from God's words. And I wonder whether this leads to the crisis in number 5. Let me read again from verse 4. These took Moabite wives. The name of the one was Orpah, the name of the other Ruth. They lived there about 10 years. And both Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husbands. It's unbelievable what is going on here. Crisis after crisis. In a way, this sounds like the book of Job. You are running away from famine, you lose your husbands. Before long, you lose your 2 sons. Just imagine being Naomi. What's going on? What is she thinking at this point? She will let us say that she left Bethlehem seeking refuge in Moab, but actually she will come back empty. In a way, it's almost like the famine in Bethlehem finds her, and her situation is even worse. Even the little she had, the husband and the children, she will lose all of them. She left with a full family. She will be left a widow. And here's something else I found striking, another crisis that you may not spot. But just imagine here is 2 sons who are in Moab for 10 years. They are married for 10 years, and we don't hear anything about children. And I don't think that is by choice. It would seem they are actually going through something very serious. It's like trouble is following them everywhere they go. They lose their father, then they also die. And then they leave widows and without children. It's almost like God is making them empty completely. So what is it that we're supposed to see here? Now, humanly speaking, one might say, this is just crisis after crisis. But I think actually, when you look at the way Naomi interprets what is happening here, I think we ought to see it as it is. This is God. We need to remember again, as I said, we are not in a novel, we are in a book in the Bible. And it is a book about God and his people. And what is happening here is actually an act of judgment. Judges shows us God's judgments. That when the people forsake God, actually everything good they thought they had, they lose it. That they are actually only ever better with God. That it is actually God who makes Bethlehem the house of bread. You will not have the house of bread if you will not have God. So the moment they forsake God, the house of bread becomes empty. It becomes the house of want. The nation is facing judgment. But actually, when a nation is facing judgment, the reality is that it is the people who actually face judgment. So what is happening at the national level is happening as well at the family level. It tells you that when leaders turn the nation away from the Lord, the people who suffer are actually people like you and I. When we turn away from God, this is what happens. Naomi doesn't think this is just bad luck. He sees this as the hand of God. So what is the lesson for us here before we move to the next point? I think number 1 is that we see God's judgment on sin is very real. You see, these days we never talk about judgment. It feels like an idea that has, long been forgotten. When we were growing up, people would set up crusades and talk about judgment. But if you go to crusades today, they don't talk much about judgment. I think actually only the Seventh-day Adventists talk about judgment. We have seen to all move away from the reality that the wages of sin, as Romans 6:23 tells us, is death. And this is what happens here. It starts with famine, it ends up with death. Death of a husband, death of his 2 sons. So what is the point for us as we sit here in Remoro today? It is to show us that God is serious when he says he will judge sin. And it will be judged in a very harsh way. It will lead to death. Spiritual death. But actually, ultimately, death is a result of sin, judgment on sin. But here is a second thing. We are also called to stick with God even amidst judgment. You see, on one hand, Israel is facing judgment. But it seems like it is even worse when this Israelite and his family move out of Israel. It would seem, actually, maybe it was better for Naomi's family to remain in Bethlehem. Them seeking refuge outside of God, even when the land is going through judgment, is worse. So the lesson for us here is actually, even if we might think God is disciplining us, even if we might think we are facing the consequences of our sin, the Bible says actually, you stick with God. You stick with God's community. It will be way, way worse if you go outside of God and his community. If you seek refuge outside of God, if you seek refuge outside of God, then actually you will find that it will be even more worse. Okay, so those are the first 2 points. Let us look at what happens next. It's a bad start, it's a difficult start, but let's see if there is hope at all. We look at verse 6 to 18. There is hope amidst judgment. So verse 1 to 5 imeanza na ghadhabu ya Mungu kwa sababu ya dhambi. Ilianza na kiangazi, ikaisha na kifo cha baba, kifo cha watoto. Na mama ametoka bila kuwa na watoto wengine. What happens next? Look at verse 6. Then she arose with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the fields of Moab that the Lord had visited his people and given them food. So, very dark, verse 1 to 5, but there is a glimmer of hope. Hope amidst judgment. Baada ya miaka 10 tunaambiwa vipi? Naomi hears Mungu amewakumbuka watu wake na amewapa chakula. Finally, after 10 years, the house of bread, Bethlehem, which had become the house of want, has actually now become again the house of bread. And look at the connection. It is the Lord who has visited the people. The only reason why Bethlehem becomes again the house of bread is because Mungu amewakumbuka watu wake. And think of the way it sounds like Judges. In Judges, they sin, they cry to God, he remembers them, he saves them through a judge. And it's the same here in Ruth. Wamefanya dhambi, wanapata ghadhabu ya Mungu, lakini Mungu anawakumbuka. But of course, they do pay for a long time. 10 years is no joke. Finally, Mungu amewakumbuka na kuna chakula in Bethlehem. But there's even more hope. Okay, so the tides, the winds of change are kind of, going the way of Naomi. So the first one is there is now bread in Bethlehem. Here is the second one. I don't know whether you will notice it. Verse 7. She set out from the place where she was with her 2 daughters-in-law, and they went on their way to return to the land of Judah. Now it's interesting. Naomi amepoteza wale watu wote alikuja na wao Moab, the husband, the children. But actually, she does not go back empty. She is with her 2 daughters-in-law who have remained with her all these 10 years. And they are going with her. So here is another glimmer of hope, another kindness from God. There is food in Bethlehem, but God has also given Naomi very unlikely companions, 2 other widows, 2 daughters-in-law. And this is very surprising. Nataka ujaribu kufikiria mtu amepoteza watoto wake wawili. What would you expect in a foreign land? Ameenda nchi ya mbali, wamepata bibi kutoka huko. What would happen once those husbands die? Very easily, the women would go and marry other husbands. And yet, baada ya miaka 10, bado hawa wawili wako naye. Listen to Naomi's logic as she tries to explain why they should go back. Verse 8, Naomi said to her daughters-in-law, "Go, return each of you to your mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband." She kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said to her, "No, we will return to you, with you to your people." Naomi anajaribu kuelezea, rudini kwa familia zenu. You are better off back home. I have nothing to offer. Actually, verse 11 to 13, she tries to explain it. She tells them, actually, I have no more sons. And even if I could get a son today, you could not wait. Hamwezi gonja miaka, until they become mature. Naomi anasema, I have nothing to offer you. You go back. Lakini these 2 women cling to her. They will not let go. The first one, Orpah, will go back, but it is not willingly. Look at what we are told here. He gives this reason. "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb, that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters. Go, for I am too old. Even if I should say I have hope, even if I should have a husband and should bear sons, would you wait? Would you refrain from marrying? No. It is bitter for me and for your sake that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me." And look at how it happens in verse 14. They are all crying. They lift their voices. They weep. Finally, Orpah goes back. But she doesn't go willingly. So it's not an easy one. She wasn't like, okay, wacha tu niende. Hata hakuna haja ya kukaa na huyu madam. No. She loves her. So that's another glimmer of hope. Another act of kindness. From very unlikely people. God has given Naomi companions. Very unlikely companions. And this is a very interesting relationship. I don't know what you expect about mothers-in-laws and daughters-in-law. Ukiona any Hollywood movie, the mother-in-law is always this angry, controlling woman. Okay? Mwenye, ni mgumu. Lakini, and what happens? If a husband died, daughter-in-law hawezi kaa hata even, a month. They would just go. And yet, look at this. These ladies have remained with her, and they actually want to go back with her when there is nothing she can offer them. They are not thinking, wacha tuende huko, pengine Mungu anaweza tusaidia. When you listen to the reasoning of Ruth, she is going there to die with Naomi. So this is not a relationship ati pengine Mungu atatukumbuka, pengine tutasaidika huko. No. They are going back because they love this woman. God has given her companions. Look at the verses that we love so much. Verse 16 to 17. Orpah goes back, Ruth clings to her. And Ruth says, "Do not urge me to leave you or return from following you. For where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I I'll be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you. Anasema tu ni kifo peke yake kitatutenganisha. In other words, Ruth is going back with Naomi, not hoping things might turn out well. No. She is going back because she loves this woman and she will be with her even if it means death in Bethlehem. These are not the words of a bride-to-be to a groom-to-be. These are actually the words of a Moabite woman to a Hebrew woman, two widows who God has brought together. What is the point of all this? I think we ought to see God's kindness towards Naomi. On one hand, we see judgment. She's lost everything. But God has given her comforters. She has given her companions. She is going back to her homeland and now there is food. But also, along the journey, God brings these two women, these very unlikely companions, to be with her. Isn't it amazing how God works? You and I, whenever we are praying to God, we have a way of expecting God to answer our prayer. So sometimes we don't even realize what God is doing. We don't even notice the unlikely people, the unlikely help that He brings our way. So here are two things we can take away here before we come to the last portion. I think one thing here is to watch out for God's kindness even amidst our trouble. Even if we thought we were facing judgment for things perhaps we have caused on our own, all because of the reality of living in a broken world, God scatters His acts of kindness, His mercy on the path of His people. God's people are never alone, even in judgment. God brings along people, comforters, companions. And so you and I need to be watching out. You might be praying for a big miracle, whether it is financially, whether it is socially, relationship-wise, or it's an issue at home. And you might feel like God is not listening to me. But actually, ukiweza angalia, you will see God's hand. God is always there, working for the good of His people, even in the deepest darkness. But even more for us who believe as believers, as Christians today, what does God tell us? He says, I will never leave you nor forsake you. Even if you didn't have these unlikely companions, I will be with you. I will be with you, He tells His disciples up to the very end of the age. Sitawahi kuacha. Shida zinaweza kukumba, matatizo yatakuja, lakini Mungu ameapa atakuwa nasi hadi mwisho. Hatatuacha kamwe. And what a comfort that is. He brings comforters, He brings companions, but the Bible also says for us as believers, He will go to us, with us, to the very valley of the shadow of death. In that darkness, God is with us. Whatever happens, God says, I will be with you to the very end. Let's come to the end, looking at the final bit. The story continues now with Naomi return to Bethlehem. And here we find there is rescue when Naomi returns to the Lord. There is rescue when Naomi returns to the Lord. Our story ends exactly where it started. It started with Bethlehem, with a family of the Ephrathites. They were living. But now it ends with that family coming back. But the family has changed. It was a man, his wife, and two sons. But now it's actually a woman and one daughter-in-law. Look at verse 19. It causes quite a stir. So the two of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. And when they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women said, is this Naomi? Now, just imagine what is going on here. There's a whole, this woman has been away for 10 years. And people could hardly recognize her. Just think about someone you haven't seen for 10 years. I think you might say like these women, is this really Naomi? Also, imagine life has not been very kind to her. She left with a husband. She left with 2 sons. Now she's come back with this foreign woman, Ruth. She is unrecognizable. Again, this is not a very easy journey. Now, I did a bit of research, which these days, when you hear someone say I did research, they just did a bit of Googling or they asked AI, okay? This is how we do research. So, I did my research, and it told me that Moab to Bethlehem is about 50 miles. In other words, that's about 80 kilometers. So we're talking about Ruth and Naomi starting Pale Uhuru Park, and they go all the way to Naivasha town. So in other words, not a very easy journey. It probably took them a couple of days. And what does it speak to us? It tells us that really this was their only hope. Why else would they trek for 80 kilometers? There was no other hope for them. But the good news is this: they are back in the land. They are back where they should be. Now, the story starts a bit funny again when it gets back to Bethlehem. Look at verse 20 to 21. The women are asking, is this really Naomi? And she says, do not call me Naomi. Call me Mara. For the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi, when the Lord has testified against me, and the Lord has brought calamity upon me? Okay, I did another research. The name Naomi means pleasant, and the name Mara means bitter. So Naomi is saying, when I was here, I was pleasant. I had a husband, I had children. But now I've come back empty. So I'm no longer Naomi. I'm no longer pleasant. I am bitter. Why? Because God has testified against me. He has brought calamity upon me. I left full, but I have come back empty. She is back in the land, but actually she feels she should never have left. She was going to seek rescue, seeking refuge outside of the land, but actually it just got worse and worse. She even says, my name is no longer pleasant. I am bitter. So in a way, the mood almost feels like we are back in chapter 1 to 5. It was one of loss, one of bitterness. But actually, the story ends with hope. As we have seen, there are glimmers of hope. One, there is food back in the land. Second, Naomi has 2 women who love her deeply, daughters-in-law, and one who has stuck with her and gone all the way back home. But actually, look at the way the story ends. Verse 22, as we bring this to an end. So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, with her, who returned from the country of Moab. And they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of barley harvests. That's another glimmer of hope there, isn't it? When they were leaving, they left when there was no harvest. They left at a time of famine. But their return is actually a return when there is food. And I think this is supposed to show us how the story changes. Because the rest of the chapters, 2, 3, and 4, actually they are no longer about judgment. They are about how God comes through for this family. She's back home, Naomi. There is food in the land. God has given her a companion in Ruth. And God will actually use this woman, Ruth, to provide for Naomi through Boaz. So things are already changing. God is coming through for Naomi. It is almost as to say, verse 22 is supposed to tell you judgment has come to an end. Verse 1, they are still in judgment. Verse 22, judgment is over. And what we now need to expect is actually God's mercy, God's kindness coming through for this family. We'll see more of that next week. But here is just a few things we can take away as we bring this to an end. One, we see Naomi acknowledge God's judgment and return back home, back to God's land. I'm making a case here that she's actually coming back to God. Only then does her story take a turn for better. So one wonders, what if she returned earlier? What if she never left? The point is saying, we are always better off with God. It is very easy to think that our help might come out there, but we are only safe, we are only sound with God and His people, even if there is nothing much to see there. If we turn away from God, if we go out of God's community, we will not find any help. We will not find any rescue. There is none out there, friends. We are only safe with God. But if we do turn away from God, and we do this all the time, we turn away from God, we turn away from His community, then here is the solution. Naomi teaches us the best thing you can do is return to God and do it quickly. Delaying will only cause you harm. Lingering will only cause you further judgment. If you do turn away from God, and we do that many times in our own sin, as we seek our own idols, in our own rebelliousness, the solution is one: don't linger, come back, return quickly. If only she came back quicker, because the winds of change really are working better for her now. If only she returned earlier. And when you do come back, here with Naomi we see the community is stirred. The women are asking questions. But actually, as you see the end of the chapter, and you'll see next week, I don't think God receives Naomi the same way the women do. The women are surprised, they are marveling. She is bitter, but God is already changing things. Judgment has come to an end. Which means that if we do come back, God will receive us. Like we read in Luke 15 with the prodigal son, God is always ready to receive us back. Whatever it is that may have caused us to turn away, the solution is return. Return and do it quickly. And as you come, God will be holding out His arms, ready to receive you. So friends, will you return to Him today? God is calling you home. If you are here and you're not a Christian, perhaps you grew up in church, perhaps you used to serve God. For one reason or another, you turned away from God. And I think maybe the point of Ruth 1, the reason why we are here, is because God wants you back. Perhaps you're a believer here who come to church frequently, but in your own heart you know you have turned away from God. You are no longer following Him. You are lingering in your sin. You are lingering in your rebellion. Ruth tells us, come back. The story of Naomi says, return and do it quickly. God is waiting. We only save with Him. So what is the conclusion? At the end of each of these chapters, I'll be giving you two things, a conclusion and a gospel connection. So what is the conclusion of Ruth 1? Here, we have to say that this chapter is actually about Naomi. Although we call the book Ruth, actually the story is about Naomi. It's about her loss, and it's about her eventual realization that it was God's hand that was against her family, which ends up with them returning back to the land, back to God. But amidst this judgment, we see God's kindness in remembering her home with food, giving her loving daughters-in-law, and one who sticks with her